The days began early, the skies still streaked with the last remnants of night as the sun fought to break through the heavy gray clouds. In the poorest section of this small town, nestled between the hills and the factory district, stood a line of shanty homes, barely standing, their walls made of patched-up sheets of wood, plastic, and scrap metal. One of these homes belonged to Samantha, a 16-year-old girl who had known nothing but struggle for as long as she could remember. Her home was small, crammed with worn-out furniture that had seen better days. The roof leaked every time it rained, and the floor was a mishmash of old wood and concrete, patched over so many times that it felt more like a puzzle of survival than a house. The kitchen was nothing more than a single-burner stove, a few rusted pots, and a table that wobbled every time it was touched. A faded photograph of her father hung crookedly on the wall, a man she had only known through the stories her mother, Lena, would tell her late at night when the world outside grew too quiet. He had died when Samantha was just 5, leaving her mother to fend for both of them. Lena had always been a strong woman, but the years of hard labor had etched deep lines into her face, and her once vibrant energy had long since faded. She worked as a laundress, scrubbing clothes for the wealthier families in town, earning just enough to keep food on the table. Her hands were calloused, raw from the chemicals and detergents she used daily, but she never complained. Not once did Lena ever let Samantha see how tired she truly was. She had a quiet dignity about her, a resilience that Samantha admired deeply. But Samantha could also see the toll it took, the exhaustion in her mother's eyes, the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly when she thought no one was watching. Despite the poverty and the hardships, there was love in their home. Every night, after the long hours of scrubbing and folding, Lena would sit beside Samantha, running her fingers through her daughter's hair as they talked about the future. "One day, you'll make it out of here," her mother would whisper, her voice soft but filled with hope. "You're smart, much smarter than I ever was. You'll find a way." Those words were like a lifeline for Samantha, something she clung to when the weight of their situation threatened to crush her spirit. She wasn't like the other kids in her school. While many of them spent their afternoons hanging out at the plaza, laughing and sharing stories about their lives, Samantha would rush home after class to help her mother with the laundry or study by the dim light of an old candle. Education was the only way out, and she knew it. She studied fiercely, staying up late into the night, her textbooks spread out before her as she tried to memorize formulas and historical dates. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if all her efforts would ever be enough. Every time she looked out at the horizon, her heart ached with the longing to escape. The town felt like a trap, a place where dreams came to die. The people who lived there, including her friends and neighbors, seemed to accept their fate with a quiet resignation. They believed that if you were born poor, you stayed poor. It was just the way of the world. Samantha, however, refused to believe that. Something inside her rebelled against the idea that her future had already been written for her. She wanted more, not just for herself, but for her mother, who had given up everything to ensure that Samantha had a chance at a better life. The thought of disappointing her mother was unbearable, and it fueled her determination even on the days when it felt like nothing would ever change. Yet, there was always doubt. It crept in during the quiet moments, whispering in her ear that maybe she was just like everyone else. Maybe no matter how hard she tried, the weight of her circumstances would always hold her back. The world had a way of crushing people like her, people who dared to dream. And still she tried. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, helped her mother with the laundry, and then made her way to school. The path she walked was long and dusty, winding through the town and past the market where vendors sold their fruits and vegetables. Samantha often wished she could stop and buy an apple or a mango, but they could barely afford the essentials, let alone the luxury of fresh fruit. At school, she kept to herself mostly, not because she didn't want friends, but because she didn't have the time for socializing. She would sit at the back of the classroom, her eyes focused on the blackboard as the teachers droned on about mathematics, science, and literature. She absorbed it all, knowing that every piece of knowledge she gained brought her one step closer to her dream. Her classmates often talked about their future plans. Some wanted to take over their family businesses. Others were content with finding jobs in the nearby factories. But Samantha wanted more. She wanted to study in the city, to go to university, and build a career that would allow her to provide for her mother and lift them out of poverty. Her teachers recognized her potential, often praising her for her hard work and intelligence. But there were always those who looked down on her because of where she came from. The wealthier students would snicker behind her back, whispering about her tattered uniform and the shoes she had been wearing for years, held together by tape and glue. They thought she didn't hear them, but she did. It hurt, but she never let it show. Instead, she used their cruelty as fuel for her ambition. She would prove them wrong. One day, she would show them that a girl from the slums could rise above her circumstances and achieve greatness. There was one person at school who truly understood her. Daniel, a boy from a similar background. His family wasn't as poor as Samantha's, but they had their own struggles. His father was a fisherman, and his mother sold goods in the market. Daniel was quiet but kind. He never made fun of Samantha like the others did. Instead, he admired her determination. The two often studied together during lunch breaks, sitting in the corner of the library where it was quiet. They didn't talk much, but their companionship brought Samantha comfort. It was nice to know that someone else understood the weight of her dreams. But even with Daniel's quiet support, the pressure was immense. There were days when Samantha felt like the walls of her life were closing in, trapping her in a cycle of poverty that seemed impossible to break. The constant struggle to make ends meet, the weight of her mother's sacrifices, the never-ending grind of studying and working, it all pressed down on her, threatening to crush her under its weight. And yet, despite it all, she couldn't allow herself to give up. One night, as she sat at the small wooden table in their kitchen, her textbooks spread out before her and the candle flickering weakly in the darkness, Samantha looked up at her mother, who was folding laundry by the dim light. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, Do you ever think things will change for us?" Her mother paused, looking up from the clothes she was folding. For a moment, the weariness in her eyes disappeared, replaced by a quiet strength. She crossed the room and sat down beside Samantha, taking her daughter's hand in her own. "Things already have changed, Samantha," Lena said, her voice filled with love. "You're my hope. You're working so hard, and I know that one day, all of this will pay off. You'll achieve your dreams. I believe in you, Anik." Tears welled up in Samantha's eyes as she squeezed her mother's hand. "I just want to make you proud, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You already have my love," Lena replied, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "You already have." As Samantha buried her face in her mother's shoulder, the weight of their struggles seemed to lift, if only for a moment. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had her mother's unwavering love and belief in her. And with that, she knew she could keep going, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. The sound of chickens crowing in the distance and the hum of motorcycles on the nearby road marked the start of another day in Bayaning Pag-asa. But for Samantha, this morning was different. As she lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, her heart beat with a strange rhythm, a mix of nervous anticipation and cautious hope. Something was coming. She could feel it like the air before a storm, heavy with a promise of change. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock on the door. Her mother's voice came through, hoarse from years of work, but always gentle. "Samantha, there's something for you." Samantha rubbed her eyes, still heavy with sleep, and pulled herself out of bed. As she walked into the main room, the thin rays of morning sunlight filtered through the holes in their tattered curtains. Her mother, Lena, stood by the door, holding a letter in her hands. The envelope was crisp, white, and unfamiliar. It stood out sharply against the worn, faded surroundings of their home. For a moment, Samantha's mind raced with questions. Who could have sent this? What was inside? Her mother handed her the letter, her expression filled with equal parts hope and anxiety. "It came this morning," Lena said quietly, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. "I think it's from the school." Samantha's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the official seal of the Central City Academy, the prestigious high school she had applied to months ago. It was a long shot, a dream that had seemed so far out of reach she hadn't dared to hope. The school was known for its rigorous academics, but more than that, it offered scholarships to students from low-income families who showed exceptional promise. Samantha had spent countless nights filling out the application, writing essays, and gathering recommendations from her teachers. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty that had defined her family for generations. But as she stood there, holding the letter in her hands, fear gripped her heart. What if they had rejected her? What if her best wasn't good enough? The weight of her entire future seemed to rest on the thin piece of paper inside that envelope. She looked up at her mother, who was watching her with anxious eyes, and took a deep breath. Slowly, carefully, she tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. The words seemed to blur together at first, her vision swimming with nerves. But then, as she read the first few lines, her heart skipped a beat. Dear Ms. Samantha Flores, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the full academic scholarship to attend Central City Academy for the upcoming school year. Samantha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as her eyes darted across the rest of the letter. It was real. She had been accepted. She had earned a full scholarship. The words on the page were both surreal and overwhelming, her mind struggling to process the reality of what this meant. This was her chance, the opportunity she had been praying for. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. Samantha? Lena asked, her voice trembling with hope and fear. What does it say? Samantha looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief and tears already welling up. I got it, Mom, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I got the scholarship. For a moment, there was silence. The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, too big, too monumental to fully grasp. Then, in an instant, Lena rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Samantha in a tight embrace. Oh my God! Lena cried, her voice breaking with joy and relief. You did it, Anik. You did it! Samantha held on to her mother, tears streaming down her face as the enormity of what she had accomplished settled in. For so long, they had struggled. For so long, she had dreamed of a way out, a way to change their lives. And now, it was finally within reach. She had the key to a better future, the one thing that could break the chains of poverty that had bound them for so long. This was her chance. But as the initial wave of joy washed over them, a new emotion crept in: fear. The scholarship covered her tuition, but what about everything else? The Central City Academy was in the heart of the city, miles away from their small town. There would be transportation costs, school supplies, uniforms, and other expenses. The letter outlined these requirements in detail, and as Samantha read them aloud, her mother's smile began to fade. How are we going to afford all of that? Lena asked quietly, her voice trembling with the weight of reality. The scholarship is a blessing, but there are still so many other costs. We don't have the money, Samantha. The hope that had filled Samantha's chest moments ago began to waver, replaced by a sinking feeling of dread. She knew her mother was right. Even with the scholarship, attending Central City Academy would require more money than they had. They barely had enough to cover their basic needs, let alone the additional costs of sending Samantha to a prestigious school in the city. Samantha looked down at the letter in her hands, her fingers tightening around the edges. This was her dream, her way out. She couldn't let it slip away. Not now, not when she was so close. But how could she make this work? Her mind raced, trying to think of solutions. She could get a part-time job, maybe two. She could study at night, work during the day. She would find a way. She had to. I'll make it work, Mom, Samantha said, her voice filled with determination. I'll find a job. I'll work as much as I need to. I can balance school and work. I won't let this opportunity slip away. Lena's face softened, but her eyes were still clouded with worry. She reached out and gently touched Samantha's cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear. I know you're strong, Samantha, she said softly, but this is a lot to carry on your own. You're still so young. I don't want you to burn yourself out before you've even started. Samantha shook her head, her jaw set with resolve. I could do it, Mom. I've been working hard my whole life. This is what we've been waiting for. I won't let it go to waste." Her mother studied her for a long moment, her eyes searching Samantha's face. Then, with a deep sigh, she nodded. "Okay, Anak, if you're sure we'll find a way. We always do." That night, as Samantha lay in bed, staring once again at the cracks in the ceiling, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. The weight of what was ahead was overwhelming. But beneath the anxiety and fear, there was also a flicker of excitement. For the first time in her life, she was on the verge of something bigger than herself. The future wasn't just a distant dream anymore. It was real, tangible, something she could almost touch. But the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. There would be sacrifices, more than she had ever made before. She would have to push herself harder than ever, balancing school and work, navigating a new world filled with people who came from wealth and privilege. But no matter how daunting it seemed, Samantha was determined to succeed. She had come too far to give up now. As she closed her eyes, she whispered a silent prayer, asking for strength, for guidance, for the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her mother, for her family, for everyone who had ever believed in her. And no matter how hard it got, she would keep going. The next morning, Samantha woke up with a new sense of purpose. She made a list of local businesses and stores that might be hiring, determined to find work as soon as possible. Her mother helped her prepare, ironing her best dress and tying her hair back neatly, as though Samantha was going to a job interview rather than asking for a chance at any kind of work. The streets of Binding Pag Asa were busy as usual, the vendors calling out their wares, the familiar smells of grilled street food and fresh produce filling the air. But for Samantha, everything felt different now. Every step she took felt like it was moving her closer to her future, even if that future was still uncertain. She spent the day going from shop to shop, asking if they needed help, offering to do anything, clean, organize, wait tables. She wasn't picky. All she wanted was a chance to earn enough money to cover her expenses for school. But the responses were mostly the same. "We're not hiring," or "We'll keep you in mind." It was disheartening, but Samantha didn't let it break her spirit. She returned home that evening, exhausted but still determined. Her mother greeted her with a warm meal, and they sat together in the dim light of their small kitchen, talking about the future. "I didn't find anything today," Samantha admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "But I'll keep trying. Someone will give me a chance." Lena smiled softly, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "I know they will, Samantha. You're too hardworking for them not to see it. Just be patient. The right opportunity will come." That night, as Samantha lay in bed once again, her mind still racing with thoughts of the future, she realized something important. This wasn't just about finding a job or earning money for school. This was about proving to herself, and to everyone else, that she was capable of rising above the circumstances she had been born into. It was about fighting for a better life, no matter how hard it seemed. And in that moment, Samantha knew that no matter what, she would find a way. She would succeed. She had to. The summer heat lingered heavily in the air as Samantha stood on the edge of her small town, looking out at the distant city skyline for the first time. From where she stood, the shimmering glass buildings of Central City seemed to rise impossibly high into the sky, their modernity and glamour so different from the humble streets of Binding Pag Asa. The city felt like a world away from everything she had known her entire life. And yet, that was where she was headed, where her dreams lay waiting. With her acceptance letter from Central City Academy in her hand and a small suitcase in the other, Samantha took a deep breath. This was it, the beginning of her new life. But as she boarded the bus, her heart was a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. Every mile the bus covered took her farther from the familiarity of her home. Her mother's comforting voice, the familiar faces of their neighbors, and the dusty streets where she had grown up. As the bus rumbled towards the city, Samantha's mind drifted back to her final weeks in Binding Pag Asa. Despite her earlier worries, she had finally found work at a local cafe, thanks to a kind-hearted owner who took a chance on her after hearing about her scholarship. The work had been exhausting. Early mornings cleaning tables, long hours on her feet serving customers. But Samantha had thrown herself into it with all her heart. Every peso she earned was a step closer to her dream, and the pride she saw in her mother's eyes each night when she came home made every aching muscle worth it. But even with the extra income, their situation remained precarious. The scholarship covered her tuition, but there were still so many other costs: books, uniforms, transportation, and Samantha had quickly realized that she would need to keep working once she arrived in the city. The prospect was daunting, but she had no choice. She couldn't let this opportunity slip through her fingers. The bus jolted to a stop, and Samantha was thrown forward slightly. She looked out the window and saw the city's bustling streets stretched out before her. The sheer size and energy of Central City were overwhelming. Everywhere she looked, there were towering buildings, flashing billboards, and streams of people rushing in every direction. It was a far cry from the slow, sleepy pace of her small town, and for a moment, Samantha felt a flicker of doubt. How would she fit in here? How would she find her way in this enormous, unfamiliar world? With her heart pounding in her chest, Samantha stepped off the bus, clutching her suitcase tightly. The heat of the city hit her immediately, mixed with the scent of gasoline and street food vendors. The noise was deafening. Honking cars, the chatter of people, and the distant hum of construction. It was all so different, so overwhelming. But Samantha had come too far to let fear stop her now. Her first destination was the Central City Academy dormitory, where she had been assigned a small room. As she walked through the busy streets, following the directions from a crumpled map she held in her hand, Samantha couldn't help but marvel at the world around her. The city felt alive in a way that Binding Pag-Asin never had. There was a constant energy in the air, a sense of movement and ambition that seemed to pulse through the streets. By the time she arrived at the academy gates, her feet were aching and sweat clung to her skin. But as she stood there, staring up at the imposing iron gates and the grand, sprawling campus beyond, she felt a surge of awe. The Central City Academy was more beautiful than she had imagined. The manicured lawns, the ivy-covered buildings, and the students walking around in their crisp uniforms made it feel like she had stepped into a completely different world. Samantha's heart raced as she approached the gate, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had worked so hard for this moment, but now that she was here, it all felt so surreal. Was she really going to be one of these students? Could she really belong here? She walked up to the security guard stationed at the gate and showed him her acceptance letter. He nodded and pointed her in the direction of the dormitories. Samantha thanked him and made her way down the winding paths of the campus, her eyes wide as she took in the sights around her. The students she passed barely glanced her way, too engrossed in their own conversations, their own lives. And yet, Samantha couldn't help but feel out of place, like an outsider looking in. When she finally reached the dormitory building, she was greeted by a tall, thin woman with glasses who introduced herself as Ms. Reyes, the dormitory supervisor. Ms. Reyes smiled kindly at Samantha, taking note of her nervousness. "Welcome to Central City Academy, Samantha," she said warmly. "I know this must all feel very overwhelming right now, but you're going to be just fine. Your room is on the second floor. Let me show you the way." Samantha nodded gratefully, following Ms. Reyes through the hallways of the dormitory. The building was older than the rest of the campus, but it had a cozy, lived-in feel. As they walked, Samantha couldn't help but notice the chatter and laughter of the other students coming from the rooms they passed. It was strange to think that this was her new home, at least for the next few years. Ms. Reyes led her to a small room at the end of the hall. "This will be your space," she said, opening the door to reveal a modest but clean room with a bed, a desk, and a small wardrobe. It wasn't much, but to Samantha, it felt like a palace compared to the cramped room she had shared with her mother back home. "Thank you," Samantha said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," Ms. Reyes said before leaving Samantha alone in her new space. As Samantha unpacked her few belongings, she felt a wave of homesickness wash over her. She missed her mother's comforting presence, the familiar smells of home, and the quiet stillness of their town. Here in the city, everything felt so fast-paced, so chaotic. But Samantha reminded herself that this was what she had worked for. This was her chance to build a better future. Later that evening, Samantha ventured out to explore the campus. As she walked through the halls and the open courtyards, she overheard snippets of conversations from the other students. Most of them came from wealthy families, discussing summer vacations in Europe or the latest gadgets they had received. Their lives were so far removed from Samantha's that it almost felt like they were living in an entirely different world. As she sat alone on a bench, watching the other students pass by, Samantha couldn't help but feel a pang of insecurity. How was she supposed to fit in here? How could she, a girl from a poor town, possibly relate to these students who had grown up with every advantage? That night, as Samantha lay in bed, the weight of the day settled on her shoulders. The excitement of her scholarship had given way to the sobering reality of her situation. She was alone in this city, surrounded by people who had never known the struggles she had faced. The doubt crept in like a dark cloud, threatening to suffocate the hope she had carried with her. But as she stared up at the ceiling, Samantha remembered her mother's words. "We always find a way." She had worked so hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let fear or insecurity hold her back now. She had come too far, fought too hard, to give up. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Samantha woke up with renewed determination. She had survived her first night, and now it was time to face her first day at Central City Academy. She dressed in the crisp uniform that had been issued to her, a navy blue blazer, a white shirt, and a pleated skirt. The uniform made her feel strange, like she was playing a part in someone else's life. But she straightened her shoulders and looked at herself in the mirror. "You belong here," she whispered to herself, willing herself to believe it. When she stepped out into the hallway, she was greeted by the buzz of students heading to class. The nervous energy in her chest grew as she followed the flow of students to the main building where her first class was scheduled. The grandeur of the academy's architecture still took her breath away as she passed through the marble-floored halls. Samantha's first class was literature, one of her favorite subjects back in Bioning Pag Asa. As she entered the classroom, her heart raced. She scanned the room, searching for a familiar face, but of course, she knew no one. She took a seat near the back, hoping to blend in, but it wasn't long before she felt the eyes of her classmates on her. Whispers followed, quiet but unmistakable. "Isn't that the scholarship girl? I heard she's from some poor town. She doesn't look like she belongs here." The words stung, but Samantha forced herself to focus on the teacher as he introduced the syllabus. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to learn, to prove herself. And no matter what anyone said, she was determined to succeed. As the days passed, Samantha settled into a routine. The classes were challenging, more difficult than anything she had experienced before, but she threw herself into her studies, determined to keep up. At night, she worked part-time at a nearby bookstore, earning just enough to cover her living expenses. It was exhausting, balancing school and work, but every time she felt like giving up, she reminded herself of her mother's sacrifices and the promise she had made to herself. But even as she worked hard, there were moments of loneliness. The other students, with their fancy clothes and privileged lives, didn't understand her struggles. They didn't know what it was like to lie awake at night, worrying about money, or to feel the weight of an entire family's hopes resting on your shoulders. Yet, amidst the isolation, Samantha found strength in her purpose. This was her chance, her opportunity to rise above her circumstances. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her family, for her future. Each day, as she navigated the challenges of her new life, Samantha held on to the belief that things would get better. She would make friends, find her place, and one day, all her hard work would pay off. Samantha's days at Central City Academy quickly settled into a rhythm, but it was far from easy. Between early morning classes, late-night shifts at the bookstore, and hours spent studying in the library, exhaustion became a constant companion. Yet, no matter how tired she felt, Samantha refused to slow down. She had come to the city with a purpose, and she wasn't going to let fatigue or fear derail her dreams. The weeks turned into months, and as Samantha continued her journey through her first semester, the challenges only intensified. The workload was heavier than anything she had ever experienced. and there were times when she felt completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of reading, assignments, and exams. Her classmates, many of whom came from affluent families, seemed to breeze through the material with ease. They had tutors, extra resources, and the kind of academic foundation that Samantha had never had access to. It wasn't uncommon to overhear them complaining about their grades or the unreasonable expectations of their professors, as though their problems were the only ones that mattered. Meanwhile, Samantha was struggling just to keep up. The scholarship she had earned was a blessing, but it didn't cover the cost of textbooks or materials, so she often had to rely on outdated library books or online resources. While her classmates spent their evenings attending social events, joining clubs, and networking with professors, Samantha spent her nights shelving books and ringing up customers at the bookstore. By the time she returned to her dormitory room, it was usually past midnight, and her energy was depleted. One particularly grueling night, Samantha found herself hunched over her desk, trying to make sense of a complex literature essay she had to submit the next morning. Her eyes were burning from lack of sleep, and her mind felt sluggish, as though it couldn't absorb any more information. The words on the page swam in front of her, and despite her best efforts, she couldn't focus. With a frustrated sigh, Samantha leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. She glanced out the small window of her dorm room, where the distant lights of the city twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives, laughing, relaxing, and enjoying the freedom that came with wealth and privilege. But here she was, trapped in a cycle of never-ending struggle. It wasn't fair. For the first time in a long while, doubt began to creep into Samantha's mind. What if she wasn't cut out for this? What if she had bitten off more than she could chew? The weight of her responsibilities, both to herself and to her family, felt like a suffocating burden. She had promised her mother that she would make something of herself, but what if she couldn't? Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, Samantha allowed herself to feel the full weight of her frustration and exhaustion. She had always been so strong, so determined, but even the strongest people had their breaking points. And right now, Samantha felt like she was nearing hers. But then, in the quiet of her room, she remembered her mother's words, the same one she had clung to since the day she left Binding Pagasa. We always find a way. Samantha took a deep breath, letting the words anchor her. Yes, things were hard right now, harder than they had ever been, but that didn't mean she was going to fail. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let her doubts win. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for her mother, for her future, for the better life that she knew she deserved. With renewed determination, Samantha wiped her tears away and turned back to her essay. She wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. Despite the challenges, there were small moments of victory that reminded Samantha of why she was fighting so hard. In her literature class, her essays began to receive praise from her professor, Dr. Salcedo, who recognized her passion and dedication. One day, after class, he called her aside. "Samantha, I've been very impressed with your work," Dr. Salcedo said, his tone kind but serious. "You have a natural gift for writing, and it's clear that you put a lot of thought and effort into your assignments. Have you considered pursuing a career in literature or writing?" The question caught Samantha off guard. She had always loved reading and writing, but she had never seriously considered it as a career. Growing up, the only thing that had ever seemed important was finding a stable job that would allow her to support her family. Literature had always been a passion, but in her mind, it wasn't practical. I haven't really thought about it," she admitted, feeling a little embarrassed. "I just want to do well here and make the most of my education." Dr. Salcedo nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that, but I want you to know that you have real potential. If you ever decide to explore this path further, I'd be happy to mentor you." Samantha was touched by the offer, and for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving, where she wasn't just working for the sake of money, but doing something she loved. But even as the thought filled her with hope, reality quickly set in. There was no time to dream right now. She still had to work, study, and pay her bills. There would be time for dreams later. One day, As Samantha sat in the library during her break, she overheard a group of students talking at the next table. They were discussing an upcoming charity event, a fundraiser for underprivileged students, organized by the Academy's prestigious Future Leaders Society. The society was one of the most exclusive clubs at the school, made up of the wealthiest and most influential students. Joining the Future Leaders Society was seen as a fast track to success, a way to build connections and open doors to opportunities after graduation. Samantha listened intently as the students talked about the event. They were planning a grand gala, complete with a silent auction, celebrity guests, and lavish decorations. It was the kind of event that Samantha could never afford to attend, let alone participate in. But then one of the students mentioned something that caught her attention. "They're looking for volunteers to help at the event," a girl said. "It's a great way to get involved, even if you're not part of the society." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. Volunteering at the gala wouldn't just give her a chance to see what the Future Leaders Society was all about. It might also help her build connections with people who could help her in the future. It was a long shot, but it was worth trying. That afternoon, Samantha signed up as a volunteer for the gala. When she told her mother about it during their weekly phone call, she could hear the pride in her mother's voice. "I'm so proud of you, Anik," her mother said. "You're doing everything you can to make the most of this opportunity. Just remember, no matter what happens, you're already a success in my eyes." Samantha smiled, her heart swelling with love for her mother. She didn't say it out loud, but she knew that she hadn't achieved anything yet. Not until she could give her mother the life she deserved. As the day of the gala approached, Samantha found herself swept up in a whirlwind of preparations. The event was being held at a luxurious hotel in the heart of the city, and as a volunteer, Samantha was responsible for helping set up the venue. It was hard work, but Samantha didn't mind. She was grateful for the opportunity to be a part of something so grand, even if it was from behind the scenes. On the night of the gala, Samantha arrived early to help with the final preparations. The hotel ballroom was breathtaking. Chandeliers glittered overhead, the tables were draped in fine linens, and the guests were dressed in elegant gowns and suits. As she moved through the crowd, making sure everything was in place, Samantha couldn't help but feel like she had stepped into a different world. This was the life she had always dreamed of, a life of beauty, sophistication, and success. But as the night wore on, Samantha began to realize that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. The students from the Future Leaders Society were polite to her, but there was a subtle distance between them and the volunteers. They laughed and mingled with the wealthy guests, while the volunteers were expected to remain in the background, unnoticed and invisible. Samantha did her best to stay focused on her tasks, but the sense of exclusion weighed heavily on her. She had come so far, worked so hard, but in moments like this, it was painfully clear that she still didn't belong in this world of privilege. As the night drew to a close, Samantha stood by the exit, helping to collect donations from the guests. She watched as they left the ballroom, laughing and chatting as though they hadn't a care in the world. And for a brief moment, Samantha wondered if she would ever truly belong in their world. Would she always be the outsider, the girl from a poor town, fighting for a place in a world that didn't seem to want her? But then, as she collected the last donation of the night, something inside her shifted. No, she might not belong here right now, but that didn't mean she never would. She had come too far to let herself be discouraged by a single night. Her journey wasn't over yet. As the guests left and the ballroom emptied, Samantha stood alone, looking out at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. This was the life she had dreamed of, and one day, she would be a part of it. Not as a volunteer, but as a guest, a leader, someone who had earned her place. With that thought in her heart, Samantha turned and walked out of the ballroom, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the new semester began, Samantha knew that things were only going to get tougher. The courses were more advanced, and the pressure to perform had never been higher. But something had shifted inside her since the gala. That night, standing in the ballroom surrounded by people who lived the life she had always dreamed of, Samantha had felt a deep sense of resolve. She wasn't going to let anything stop her. Not her circumstances, not her doubts, not the obstacles that seemed to pile up in front of her every day. However, Despite her determination, life was still full of challenges. The scholarship covered her tuition, but every other aspect of her life was a constant juggling act. She had to budget carefully, stretching every dollar to make sure she could afford food, supplies, and the occasional bus fare to get across the city. Working at the bookstore helped, but it meant long nights and less time to study. Sometimes, she didn't know how she managed to stay on top of everything. But the greatest challenge wasn't the work, it was the loneliness. Samantha had always been independent, but the feeling of being an outsider at Central City Academy gnawed at her. Her classmates, with their fancy clothes, expensive gadgets, and confident, carefree attitudes, seemed to inhabit a world she couldn't touch. They spoke about vacations in Europe, their parents' businesses, and plans for internships at prestigious firms. It was a life so far removed from Samantha's own reality that it was almost laughable. There were moments when Samantha felt invisible, as though no one even noticed she was there. She would walk through the halls, her head down, clutching her books tightly as the other students glided past her in their designer clothes, laughing and chatting about things she couldn't relate to. Sometimes she wondered if anyone even knew her name. One day, after a particularly exhausting shift at the bookstore, Samantha found herself sitting alone in the school library, staring blankly at the pages of her history textbook. It had been a long week, and the weight of everything, her studies, her job, the constant struggle to keep up, felt like too much to bear. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, a voice broke through her reverie. "Hey, Samantha, right?" She looked up surprised. A girl stood in front of her, smiling. She was one of the students Samantha recognized from her literature class but had never spoken to before. Her name was Clara, and she was everything Samantha was not: confident, outgoing, and effortlessly stylish. Yeah, Samantha replied, feeling awkward. "That's me. I've seen you around," Clara said, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from her. "You're always in the library. I figured it was about time I introduced myself." Samantha smiled nervously, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to people approaching her out of the blue, and she couldn't help but wonder why Clara had chosen to talk to her now. "I'm Clara, by the way," the girl continued, offering her hand. Samantha shook it, still feeling a little off balance. "I've seen you in literature class," Clara said. "You're always turning in these amazing essays. Dr. Salcedo talks about you all the time. You've got some serious talent." Samantha felt a flush of pride at the compliment, but quickly pushed it down. "Thanks," she said modestly. "I just work hard, I guess." Clara tilted her head, studying Samantha with a curious expression. "Why do you always keep to yourself?" she asked. "You don't seem like the type to just fade into the background." Samantha shrugged, feeling a little defensive. "I don't know. I guess I just don't fit in with everyone here." Clara nodded, as though she understood. "Yeah, I get that. Central City can be pretty cliquey sometimes, but just because you feel like you don't fit in doesn't mean you can't find your own place here." The words hit Samantha like a bolt of lightning. It was true. She had spent so much time feeling like an outsider that she hadn't even tried to find her own space in this world. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe she didn't have to blend in with the crowd to belong. For the first time in a long while, Samantha felt a glimmer of hope. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Samantha began to talk more frequently. They would meet in the library between classes, exchanging notes and talking about their assignments. It was a small friendship at first, but for Samantha, it was everything. For the first time, she felt like she had someone who saw her for who she was, someone who didn't care about her background or her struggles. Clara was wealthy. There was no denying that. But she never made Samantha feel inferior. Because of it, one afternoon, as they sat in the library studying for an upcoming literature exam, Clara casually mentioned something that made Samantha's heart skip a beat. "I'm thinking about applying for an internship at Veritas Publishing this summer," Clara said, flipping through her notes. "It's super competitive, but I think I've got a shot. You should apply too." Samantha stared at her, stunned. "What? Me? Yeah, why not?" Clara said, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You're an amazing writer, and you've got a lot of passion. Veritas is all about fresh voices and new perspectives. You'd be perfect." Samantha felt a rush of emotions: excitement, fear, doubt. The idea of applying for an internship at one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the city was thrilling, but it also seemed impossible. She was just a girl from a poor town, struggling to make ends meet. What chance did she have against students who had all the advantages? I don't know, Samantha said hesitantly. I mean, I don't have the connections or the experience. I'm not sure they'd even consider me. Clara raised an eyebrow. You're kidding, right? Connections don't matter as much as you think. What matters is your talent, and you've got that in spades. Samantha's mind raced. Could she really do it? Could she take a shot at something so far out of her comfort zone? The fear of failure gnawed at her, but beneath it, there was something else. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance. As the weeks passed, Samantha threw herself into preparing for the internship application. She spent hours perfecting her writing samples, crafting a thoughtful cover letter, and updating her resume. She knew that the odds were against her, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream. The day she submitted her application, Samantha felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had done everything she could, and now all she could do was wait. In the meantime, life continued. Samantha's classes grew more demanding, and her shifts at the bookstore became longer as the end of the semester approached. There were moments when the stress threatened to overwhelm her, but she held on to the hope that things might change. That maybe, just maybe, something good was on the horizon. And then one day it happened. Samantha was in the middle of a shift at the bookstore when her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, expecting another bill reminder or an email from one of her professors. But when she saw the subject line, her heart stopped. Congratulations! Internship offer from Veritas Publishing. Samantha's hands shook as she opened the email, her eyes scanning the words in disbelief. They had accepted her. Veritas Publishing had chosen her for their summer internship program. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen in shock. All the doubts, all the fears, all the nights spent worrying about whether she would ever make it. It had all been worth it. She had done it. She had taken a chance, and it had paid off. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting her co-workers to see. But inside, her heart was soaring. She couldn't wait to call her mother, to tell her the news. She could already hear her mother's voice, full of pride and joy. "Anik, I knew you could do it," she would say. "I always knew." Samantha smiled to herself, feeling a sense of accomplishment like she had never felt before. This was just the beginning. She knew that. There were still many challenges ahead, many more battles to fight. But for the first time, Samantha felt like she was truly on her way. She had broken through the barriers that had once seemed insurmountable, and now, the future was full of possibilities. That night, as she lay in her small dormitory bed, Samantha stared up at the ceiling, her heart full of hope. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, and she knew, deep in her soul, that this was only the beginning of her story. The summer dawned bright and full of promise for Samantha as she embarked on her internship at Veritas Publishing. She arrived at the towering glass building in downtown Central City, her heart pounding with excitement and nerves. The prestige of the company, the opportunity it presented, and the knowledge that this was her first real step toward a better future. It was all overwhelming, but in the best possible way. The world felt wide open, as if for the first time, she could see the path before her, even if it was still a long and winding one. On the first day, Samantha wore her best outfit, a simple yet professional blouse and slacks she had bought with her savings. She entered the lobby, feeling like a small fish in a big pond, surrounded by people who moved with purpose and confidence. There was a steady hum of energy in the air, the type of energy Samantha had only dreamed about. The large windows allowed sunlight to stream in, casting long, sleek shadows on the polished floors, and the distant chatter of employees filled the space with life. She was greeted by Ms. Lyons, the internship coordinator, a no-nonsense woman with sharp features, a tailored suit, and an air of authority that demanded respect. Ms. Lyons gave Samantha a brief but efficient orientation before handing her a stack of papers, outlining her tasks for the next few weeks. "You're going to be working closely with the editorial team," Ms. Lyons said, her tone brisk. "Your job is to assist in proofreading manuscripts, managing correspondence with authors, and doing some market research. You'll also have the opportunity to sit in on meetings. Learn everything you can. This is your chance to show us what you've got." Samantha nodded, determined not to let the opportunity slip through her fingers. She was ready to prove herself, to show that she deserved this chance just as much as anyone else, regardless of her background or how she had gotten here. The first few days were a whirlwind. Samantha spent her time learning the ropes, getting used to the pace of the office, and familiarizing herself with the different aspects of the publishing world. It was a steep learning curve, but she embraced it with open arms. She found herself staying late most nights, poring over manuscripts and taking meticulous notes. It was tiring, but it didn't feel like work, it felt like passion. One day, after a long afternoon of proofreading, Samantha was approached by Mr. Holden, one of the senior editors. He was a tall, slightly graying man in his early 50s with a calm, thoughtful demeanor that commanded quiet respect. "Hey, Samantha, right?" he asked, peering over his glasses as he stood at her desk. "Yes, sir," Samantha replied, standing up, feeling a little intimidated by his presence. "I've been looking over some of your notes on the manuscripts," he said, holding up a folder filled with papers she had edited. "You've got a keen eye for detail. Have you ever considered going into editing as a career?" The question caught Samantha off guard. Of course, she had dreamed of working in publishing, but she hadn't given much thought to a specific role yet. She was still trying to figure out where she fit into this world. I'm not sure yet," she admitted honestly, "but I've always loved stories. I think that's why I'm here, to figure out where I belong." Mr. Holden smiled warmly, something that softened his serious demeanor. "That's the right mindset. Publishing is a tough industry, but if you're passionate about stories, you'll find your place. You've got potential, Samantha. I'd like to see what you can do with something more substantial." Samantha's heart raced with excitement and nerves. "What do you mean?" "I'm giving you a project," Mr. Holden said, handing her a thick manuscript. "This is a novel we've been on the fence about. The story has potential, but the writing needs work. I want you to read it, make your notes, and come back to me with your recommendations. Think of it as your first real editorial assignment." Samantha stared at the manuscript in her hands, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. This was a huge responsibility, and she didn't want to mess it up. "Thank you, Mr. Holden," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. "I'll do my best." "I know you will," he said, giving her a nod before walking away. As soon as he was out of sight, Samantha sat down and stared at the manuscript. She couldn't believe it. After just a few weeks, she had already been given such an important task. The pressure weighed heavily on her, but she knew she couldn't let fear stop her. This was her moment to prove that she belonged here. For the next few days, Samantha dove into the manuscript, reading it carefully and taking detailed notes. It was a story about a young woman navigating her way through a world of political intrigue and personal betrayal, a plot that Samantha found both exciting and challenging. The author's ideas were brilliant, but the execution was lacking, with clunky dialogue and uneven pacing that dragged the story down. Samantha spent hours revising the text, suggesting changes, reworking paragraphs, and streamlining the narrative. She was meticulous in her approach, wanting to show Mr. Holden that she had the skills to handle a project like this. The more she worked on the manuscript, the more she found herself drawn into the process, finding joy in the challenge of refining the story into something better. Despite her exhaustion from long hours, Samantha felt more alive than she had in years. She was finally doing what she loved, and the sense of purpose it gave her was indescribable. Every day, she woke up excited to go to work, eager to see what new challenges awaited her. One evening, after another long day at Veritas, Samantha decided to call her mother. It had been a few weeks since they last spoke, and she missed the sound of her mom's voice. She dialed the number, her heart filled with anticipation as she waited for her mother to answer. "Hello," her mother's familiar voice came through the line, tired but warm. "Hi, Mom," Samantha said, smiling to herself. "It's me." "Samantha, how are you, Enoch? How's the internship going?" "It's amazing," Samantha replied, her voice full of excitement. "I've been working on this manuscript, and it's such a great experience. I can't believe they trusted me with something so important. I'm so proud of you," her mother said, and Samantha could hear the emotion in her voice. "You've worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of success that comes your way." Tears filled Samantha's eyes as she listened to her mother's words. I wish you could see it, Mom. I wish you could be here. One day I will, her mother said softly. And until then, I'll be cheering for you every step of the way. Samantha wiped her eyes, feeling a mixture of pride and longing. She missed her family deeply, but she knew that everything she was doing was for them, for her mother, her siblings, and for herself. I'll make you proud, Samantha promised, her voice choked with emotion. You already have, Anik, her mother replied. More than you'll ever know. As the internship progressed, Samantha's confidence grew. She finished her work on the manuscript and presented it to Mr. Holden, who praised her for her keen editorial eye and thoughtful revisions. The project gave her a boost of credibility within the company, and soon, other editors were seeking her input on their projects as well. By the end of the summer, Samantha had not only completed her internship, but she had also built relationships with key people in the publishing industry, people who saw her potential and believed in her abilities. For the first time, Samantha felt like she truly belonged in this world. But the end of the internship also meant the return to her life as a student, a reality that felt both familiar and distant after the whirlwind of the summer. As she packed up her desk on her last day, Samantha couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She wasn't ready for this chapter to end. As she was leaving the office, Ms. Lyons approached her, a folder in hand. Samantha, she said, her expression serious. We've been impressed with your work this summer. You've shown real dedication and skill. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. Thank you, Ms. Lyons. We'd like to offer you a part-time position here while you finish your studies, Ms. Lyons continued. It's not full-time, but it'll give you the opportunity to continue working with us and gaining experience. Samantha stared at her in disbelief. A part-time job at Veritas? This was more than she had ever hoped for. I don't know what to say, Samantha stammered. Thank you. This is incredible. Ms. Lyons smiled, a rare softness in her usually stern demeanor. You've earned it. Welcome to the team, Samantha. That night, as Samantha walked home, she felt a sense of fulfillment and joy that she had never known before. She had come so far from the girl who had arrived in Central City, unsure of herself and her place in the world. She had faced countless obstacles, but through it all, she had persevered. And now, as she looked ahead to her future, she knew that this was only the beginning. As the crisp autumn air settled over Central City, Samantha felt the weight of her newfound responsibilities at Veritas Publishing. The thrill of working in the publishing industry had morphed into a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer just a student navigating a scholarship. She was becoming part of something bigger, something that resonated deeply with her dreams. The part-time position was challenging, but it invigorated her spirit and sharpened her focus. With her classes ramping up at Central City Academy, her schedule was busier than ever. Balancing her coursework, her job, and the never-ending tasks of life was a juggling act. Yet, every day brought new lessons, and with every challenge, Samantha discovered more about herself. The first major project assigned to her after securing her part-time role was a collection of short stories by emerging authors. The editor overseeing the project, Ms. Dunn, was known for her keen eye and sharp editorial skills. Samantha felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she prepared to meet with her. Are you ready for this? Ms. Dunn asked, her sharp gaze penetrating but not unkind. They were seated in the small conference room, surrounded by manuscripts scattered across the table like fallen leaves. Samantha nodded, taking a deep breath. I think so. I've read through some of the stories already, and I'm excited to get started. Ms. Dunn studied her for a moment and then smiled. Good. I expect you to be honest and thorough. These authors need constructive feedback, and you're going to play a vital role in shaping their work. The pressure was palpable. Samantha understood the weight of her task. Her words would influence the direction of budding authors' careers. As the meeting concluded, she felt a surge of determination. She was ready to contribute to something meaningful. That afternoon, Samantha dove into the manuscripts, feeling an exhilarating mix of creativity and responsibility. She was struck by the diverse voices represented, Each author had a unique story to tell, filled with personal struggles, cultural nuances, and imaginative worlds. As she read, she felt a deep connection to their journeys. Their stories mirrored her own in some ways, reflecting the determination and hope that fueled their narratives. One story, in particular, captured her attention. A tale of a young boy from a poor family who dreamed of becoming a scientist. The author's prose was raw and heartfelt, and Samantha found herself immersed in the character's struggles and triumphs. She saw her own battles in the boy's journey, reminding her of her dreams and the hard work it took to get there. Samantha spent hours drafting her feedback, meticulously noting her thoughts on structure, character development, and emotional depth. Each word felt like a labor of love, and she approached the task with the respect and dedication it deserved. By the time she presented her feedback to Ms. Dunn, she felt a mixture of nervousness and pride. Ms. Dunn reviewed Samantha's notes, her brows furrowing in concentration as she flipped through the pages. "Impressive work," Ms. Dunn said, glancing up at Samantha. "Your insights are spot on. You've got a talent for identifying what these stories need to resonate more deeply." Samantha's heart swelled with pride. For someone like Ms. Dunn to recognize her efforts felt monumental. It solidified her belief that she was on the right path, and the dream of a successful career in publishing no longer felt distant. It felt tangible, within reach. Over the next few weeks, Samantha poured herself into her work. She spent long hours reading, writing, and discussing the projects with her team. The camaraderie she developed with her colleagues added another layer of joy to her experience. They shared stories of their own journeys. Some had come from prestigious backgrounds, while others had struggled just as Samantha had. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling editing session, Samantha found herself seated next to Eric, a fellow intern who had become a friend. They often collaborated on projects, bouncing ideas off each other, sharing laughter amid the stress. "You know, I was thinking about what you said the other day," Eric began, leaning back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "About how we all have our own stories. It's kind of wild, isn't it? The way we all ended up here, working together?" Samantha nodded, feeling a rush of camaraderie. "Yeah, it really is. Everyone has faced their own battles to get here. It makes you appreciate this opportunity even more." Eric grinned, his blue eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Right? And it makes me want to tell my story through my writing. I've been working on a piece that's inspired by my own experiences. Maybe you could read it sometime." "Absolutely. I'd love to," Samantha replied, genuinely excited. "It's important for us to support each other, especially in this industry." As they continued their conversation, Samantha felt a sense of belonging that she had longed for since arriving at Central City Academy. She was no longer just an outsider looking in. She was part of a community, one that understood the struggles and triumphs of pursuing a dream. However, amid the joys of work and friendships, the challenges of balancing her studies loomed large. As midterms approached, Samantha struggled to keep up with her coursework. The late nights spent at Veritas began to take their toll on her studies, and she felt the familiar tension creeping back in. One night, overwhelmed by assignments and a looming deadline, Samantha sat at her cluttered desk in her dorm room, her head buried in her hands. The stress felt suffocating, and doubt crept in. What if she couldn't handle it all? What if she failed? Just then, her phone buzzed with a message from Clara, her friend from school. "Hey, you okay? I noticed you've been a bit MIA lately. Let's catch up soon." Samantha sighed, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Clara always seemed to know when she needed a friend. They had bonded over their shared experiences, and Clara's presence reminded Samantha that she wasn't alone in this journey. "Yeah, I'm just swamped. Can we meet up tomorrow?" Samantha replied. "Of course. Let's grab coffee. You need a break." Smiley face. The next day, as they sat in a cozy coffee shop, sipping steaming mugs of cappuccino, Clara listened intently as Samantha poured out her frustrations. "I feel like I'm drowning," Clara, Samantha admitted, staring into her cup. "I want to do well at Veritas, but my classes are piling up, and I don't know how to balance it all." Clara leaned forward, her expression earnest. "You're doing amazing, Samantha. It's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes. You're juggling a lot. Have you thought about talking to your professors about your workload? Samantha frowned, considering the idea. I haven't. I didn't want to seem like I was making excuses. Trust me, they understand. Most of them have been in your shoes before. They want to help you succeed, Clara reassured her. Feeling a spark of hope, Samantha took a deep breath. You're right. I need to ask for help. I can't do this alone. The following week, Samantha mustered the courage to approach her professors during office hours. She explained her situation, detailing her internship, the added workload, and her commitment to doing well in their classes. To her relief, they were understanding and offered her extensions on assignments and guidance on managing her time effectively. With newfound clarity, Samantha devised a plan that allowed her to balance her work and studies. She set aside specific hours for her job, her classes, and her personal time. She made a schedule and stuck to it, prioritizing self-care amid her busy life. As the weeks rolled on, Samantha discovered the power of communication and vulnerability. She learned that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to her strength and determination. Her professors admired her commitment and encouraged her to keep pushing forward. As the semester came to a close, Samantha found herself in a rhythm. She successfully completed her project at Veritas, contributing to the short story collection that would soon be published. The sense of accomplishment was intoxicating, and she reveled in the excitement of seeing her name among those of esteemed authors. At the same time, she excelled in her classes, earning grades that reflected her hard work and dedication. When she received her midterm report, a wave of relief washed over her. She had managed to juggle her responsibilities without compromising her performance. With each passing day, Samantha felt more like the person she wanted to be. She embraced her growth, recognizing the strength she had cultivated through her struggles. She was not just a girl from a poor family trying to find her way. She was a passionate writer, a dedicated intern, and a resilient student. One evening, as Samantha prepared to head home after a long day at Veritas, she found a note on her desk from Mr. Holden. Meet me in my office. I want to discuss your future with Veritas. Her heart raced. What could he possibly want? She quickly made her way to his office, her mind swirling with possibilities. Come in, Samantha, he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. The walls of his office were lined with books, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and leather. Thank you for meeting with me, Samantha said, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Holden leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. You've impressed the entire team with your work this summer and your contributions to the short story collection. We think you have a bright future in publishing. Samantha held her breath, trying to contain her excitement. Thank you, sir. That means a lot to me. We'd like to extend an offer for you to continue working with us through the school year. If you're interested, he said, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity. Samantha felt a rush of emotion. I'd love that. I can't believe this is happening. Mr. Holden smiled, his demeanor warm. I believe you have the potential to grow even further with us. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can accomplish. As Samantha walked home that evening, she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride and joy. She had worked hard, faced her fears, and risen to challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. Her dreams were becoming a reality, and the future felt bright. In that moment, she realized that her journey was not just about achieving success. It was about growth, resilience, and the connection she had forged along the way. Every obstacle she had faced had shaped her into the person she was becoming. A person ready to embrace the world, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel.